broadcasting live out of a basement in Appleton, Wisconsin. You're tuned into Fox Cities Core on WCZR Code Zero Radio. We're the show that gives you an opportunity to call in and be a part of the show. Our call-in line is 920-358-0795. Core.
Hello everybody, welcome to Fox Cities Core on WCZR Code Zero Radio. If this is your first time tuning in, WCZR is an independent streaming rock station based out of Appleton, Wisconsin. We play lots of great music from the Fox Cities and beyond, right alongside your mainstream favorites. You can find us by using the web player at live.codezeroradio.com. You can find us on TuneIn, Get Me Radio, on any app where you can stream digital radio. You can also find us on a YouTube page as far as Fox Cities Core. Just search for Fox Cities Core, and you shall find it. My next guest is an accomplished musician with roots here in the Fox Cities. He started playing music in bands like Yesterday's Kids and the Obsoletes, and eventually played all over the country in bands like Screeching, Weasel, and Bash and Pop with Tommy Stintson and the Replacements. He's currently a mastering engineer and runs Mystery Room Mastering out of Madison, Wisconsin. I'd like to welcome Justin Perkins to Fox Cities Core. How are you doing, Justin?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. This is quite a great streaming setup you have down here.
Thank you. That's a very nice compliment. I appreciate that. Just to kind of start out, you've been involved in the music scene for 3 decades now?
I would say so. We started doing stuff in the 90s, basically in middle school. Went to Nina grade school, middle school, high school, and stuff like that. So, yeah, we started playing out in the 90s. I can't remember if we played with one of your bands at the Stompin' Grounds at one point, or do you remember Stompin' Grounds?
I don't.
Okay, it was just south of Nina. But, one of our first shows, I think we were in probably 6th, 7th grade. We played with Vesicular Basalt, which was pretty intense experience to experience as a maybe a teenager. We were pretty young at the time, so it was pretty intense to see a show like that. But it inspired us to keep going and keep doing it.
Now, as far as like picking up an instrument, I believe that didn't your dad have an acoustic guitar or something that he stumbled upon?
Yeah, my parents got me this little tiny acoustic guitar, like a kid-size acoustic guitar. And my dad played a little bit of guitar, but he was left-handed, so I couldn't really, aside from it being probably too big for me when I was little, I was also left-handed. But I did learn how to play some chords left-handed eventually, upside down. But it was really my 5th grade teacher in Nina, Mr. Raboyne. He was a big fan of the Beatles and David Bowie and stuff. So every Friday at the end of the week, at the end of the day, he would bring out his acoustic guitar, and the whole class would sing along. He would play and the whole class would sing. He'd have the lyrics on the overhead projector, if you remember those things, mm-hmm. where he'd normally put class assignment. He had the lyrics for the Beatles songs and stuff. So that really inspired me to pick it up and start learning how to play, because I could see this guy in the same room as me playing guitar and how you can make it sound. And then right around then is when Nevermind by Nirvana was released. And again, that was coming out of the 80s and early 90s. Music was a little bit ridiculous with, program stuff that I could never imagine, having the tools or ability to program, or just hair metal and 80s rock. It's just not attainable. But when Nirvana came along, we were like, wow, this sounds pretty raw. We could probably try to do something that sounds like this even as 6th and 7th graders. So,
and eventually you started some bands and started writing. Well, you did covers, kind of learned a couple covers, right? Then,
yeah, I mean, that's how you start. You got to learn you got to play something, and then you start writing your own songs. But yeah, me and Tim Schweiger started bands pretty young. I want to say 7th. For sure, by 8th grade, we were playing, friends' parties and stuff like that, and the talent show at high school and middle school and stuff. And then eventually, I don't know how we got on that show with Vesicular Basalt. Some pretty cool local bands at the time, but we were I think it was an all-ages place, maybe. Yeah, it was actually a dry bar. They just served sodas and stuff, but it was cool.
Was that Amazing Larry?
Yeah, that would have been Amazing Larry. Named after a minor character in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which we were probably watching a lot at the time.
And then eventually you got signed to a record label.
Yeah.
And changed the name of the band.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. We were called Amazing Larry really young, and then we had a band in high school. And then after high school, it was the same guys, so we just called it Amazing Larry because we were just too lazy to think of a new name. But when we did get offered a record deal, it was suggested to come up with a better name. So we did. We didn't disagree. It was more of a recording project, so we didn't really have to have a name. It was just more of a working name. But yeah, once we got an offer to put out our album, we called it Yesterday's Kids, which seemed like a better band name. So.
And then Yesterday's Kids ended up releasing a full album and
yeah, first we did an EP. We recorded what we thought were demos at Simple Studios in Green Bay. And then we sent that to maybe get a record deal, and they ended up just putting that out. We got rid of some songs because we did like 12 songs. But in hindsight, we probably should have re-recorded that because we just rushed through it, in a weekend or two to be demos. They put that out as an EP, and then we did a proper album after Simple Studios moved to the bigger room. Then we did a full album, and by that point, I was starting to engineer other bands there. So it was kind of cool because we had somewhat unlimited time to record that album, which you can tell by all the percussion and bells and whistles that we probably overdid on that album. But, we had unlimited studio time for the most part to a degree. So that's how that album got done.
You guys had created a pretty big wave with that band, and then you ended up sort of morphing. It was sort of almost the same band, but you ended up starting a new one called the Obsoletes.
Yeah, that happened because I was working at Simple Studios so much, and I was living in Neenah still. The studio was in Green Bay, and a lot of times I just wouldn't feel like driving back to Neenah just to sleep for a little bit and then go back to the studio. So I would stay at the studio, or between sessions I was recording, just demos and ideas for whatever, just goofing around basically. But I had happened to do it to a drum machine, kind of like it was early computer recording days, so basically like recording to a click track, but I used a drum machine. And then a mutual friend introduced me to John Phillip, who's a drummer. He was in the Benjamins, and they had just broken up too, so he was looking for something to do, I think, and I invited him up to play drums on these demos, and the fact that he could play to a metronome was huge because he could just drum along to the song was basically done. It just had a cheesy drum machine, and he put real drums on, and I think he was really the one that wanted to play live the most. He was like, we should start a band and do this live. And it's funny, I ran into this guy named Josh Engel at the show last night, the Dusk show. He played some of the first Obsoletes shows. He's an organ player, a B3 player, and we somehow convinced him to haul his Leslie and B3 around with us, which didn't last too long because those are so heavy. And stuff. It ended up reverting back to just me and Tim and a drummer, this time a different drummer named John Phillip. So it's kind of ended up being the same band in the end. I started on guitar with Obsoletes, but we tried to do the big 5-piece thing with like 2 guitars, organ, all this extra junk. But at the time, it was easier to just be a 3-piece because it was easier to travel. We didn't have to practice as much because less could go wrong with 3 people than 5 or 6. So we just reverted back to a 3-piece and kept going and made the Obsoletes album proper.
Did you like the touring aspect? I know you did some shows with Super Drag. I mean, was that something that the band overall enjoyed? It had to be kind of exciting, I'm guessing.
Occasionally. I didn't love touring and traveling. Later on when I was playing in bands that had, more of a budget, we were staying in hotels and flying, especially like with Screeching Weasel, there was a lot of fly-out shows, so it's just like I grabbed my bass and got on an airplane, and there was a nice Ampeg waiting on stage for me to plug into, and then I play the show and go home. That was easy, and I didn't necessarily I don't mind traveling in general, but as you know, being in a band traveling, there's so much downtime. It's like you drive all day, eat gas station, fast food, so much downtime, and then you play for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you gotta, at that point we weren't necessarily staying in hotels, so I just didn't like that whole part of it. So we didn't do a lot of touring, and I think that's what ultimately led me to being more in the studio. I think, as the Obsoletes were starting, was also recording a lot more other bands that were asking me to record them, and I really liked that. And I wasn't trying to start a career as a recording engineer, but it just happened organically. But I will say that one of the best things I did for that career was being in a band, because you go out and play shows, and you meet other bands that want to record or need to record, and it was an amazing way to network that I didn't even realize I was doing at the time. It just very organically happened.
So it's sort of, you were recording your bands, Yesterday's Kids and the Obsoletes, and just kind of started learning more and more?
Yeah, I was recording our bands out of necessity because, way early on, we didn't have the money to go into a studio, like in 6th and 7th grade, so we were just renting this cassette 8-track from the music store to record our stuff on, and that progressed into recording in my dad's basement. I was starting to accumulate gear to record, or I would go to bands' basements or practice spaces and record their album, there. And it didn't sound great, but it was good practice and everything. And then that kind of led me to actually getting to record at, work at Simple Studios, which was the place. I don't know if you guys remember this, but like back in the 90s, when you would get someone's CD and you put it on, you could tell within like the first 10 seconds if they did it at Simple Studios or not, because it just usually sounded awesome. Eric was a great engineer, and he taught me a lot about just not how to record, but also how to listen to music. Like when I first started recording, I didn't understand that you could make things sound like lo-fi or hi-fi or far away or close up. I just thought you put a mic in front of it and recorded it, and that was it. He really taught me about like aesthetics and recording, like how to make it sound this way or that way. So anyway, he taught me a lot, and and I just sort of got tired of touring, playing live and stuff like that, and running around the Midwest in a van in the wintertime and stuff like that, and settled into the studio for recording other bands.
I remember Simple Studios. There was like a cabinet, I think you mentioned you guys built that to kind of mic and amp, I think, for one of the sessions.
Yeah, Eric built that. He built these 2 silver boxes. He was recording a lot of punk bands, so it was pretty predictable. Drummer, bass player, you could put the bass amp in the closet, and then he had these 2, most bands had 2 guitars, so he built these 2 silver boxes you could put a half stack in, and it worked out great because everyone could be playing in the same room. You'd get a little bit of guitar amp bleed that sounded cool, but it wasn't like, it was still isolated enough to sound good for a recording. So Eric definitely built all that. I didn't do anything build-out wise at his studio, except I added some of my equipment and stuff like that.
So at this point, when you started recording more, you kind of made the decision to sort of step away from the band kind of situation here. But what was the music scene like in the Fox Cities at that time?
I thought it was really healthy. You had this interesting mix of bands. We came from more of the punk side of things. You had a great band called Andy's Automatics that were, more, I guess, not so much alt country, but, country that is listenable, not modern country. They're doing a lot of like, Dwight Yoakam kind of stuff, and not exactly Dwight Yoakam, but you know what I mean, like what I would call like the good country music. And they did like Corey Chisel, and I think our common thing was we all like Tom Petty. We could all do Tom Petty covers and have a great show playing together. And I think we did do some shows together, and it was interesting because you got this kind of like punk garage kind of band. You got Andy's Automatics, and you got Corey Chisel doing his thing, and it was interesting. I think it was a really healthy music scene. Like a lot of overlap, places to play. Cranky Pat's. Cranky Pat's is interesting because I grew up going there just as a kid and middle schooler to eat pizza because it was the only place open, late at night where you could go and get warm and eat pizza. And then they started doing shows. They put in that bar and they started doing shows right around when I turned 21, and just kind of like kept going there. It was kind of interesting timing, but there was other there was Tom's Garage. I don't know if you remember Tom's Garage. That was interesting. It didn't last too long, but I think it was a really healthy music scene. So again, playing in bands, playing these shows just helped me get more work in the studio without even really having to try. Because back then I was doing recording and mixing, so it takes a while to record and mix an album versus mastering. So between the recording projects and the waning amount of live shows, I've stayed really busy with music through all that time.
Yeah, how many bands do you think you recorded?
I don't know if I could count, to be honest with you.
Are we talking like thousands?
Hundreds. I would say hundreds of bands I recorded between, like, I started recording other bands when I was still in high school, and I kind of stopped doing recording and mixing work around 2008 or 9. So for over 10 years, I was recording a lot of bands. I would say easily hundreds of bands I had recorded in that roughly 15-year span before I made a transition to mastering.
We have a question here from Into the Music, which is a really great podcast out of the area.
Okay.
Enjoying the show this morning, Justin. What are some of your favorite Fox Cities related projects that you've mastered?
Well, the new Dusk album is a pretty memorable album, I think. Just came out last month, and they just had their release show. So, and apparently there's 2 Dusk bands from this area.
There's like a metal Dusk, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know anything about them, but I'm speaking about the other Dusk. Tenement, pretty much any band Amos is in, I really like. Oh man, the thing with mastering, I can do like an album in a day or like a number of singles. So it's so fast paced that when you put me on the spot, it's kind of like when you go into the record store and you can't think of any bands that you want to look for their CDs and vinyl.
You've done just such a large amount of bands too. It's kind of like,
yeah, that's the kind of thing with mastering too, is it's just so fast paced. So you're going to do a lot of projects. Whereas I think I said it earlier, but recording and mixing, you spend more time with each band, so it's less projects and easier to remember them. But
when you were
to come back to that one.
When you were recording, were you doing any mastering back then?
Yeah, not proud of it, but back then, not a lot of people knew what mastering was, and the internet wasn't what it is now. So, let's say I was recording a band at Simple Studios in Green Bay. Well, they didn't really have the budget or time or knowledge to hire a mastering, to go somewhere else to master it, because it meant they had to drive to Milwaukee or Chicago or maybe Minneapolis, or they would have to fly to a big city, or they would just have to send it off physically, like FedEx, a hard drive or a DVD, send it off to a place in the big cities and just get it back, and that's it. And that's the Yesterday's Kids album. That's what we did, because we were on Lookout Records. We finally had, well, the record label Lookout Records, they were used to having records mastered by this certain guy in California. So once we were done mixing, we sent it off, through the mail or FedEx or whatever, and we got it back, and it was done. We're like, okay, it's done. It's not like now when I master stuff now, I send it through the internet, and people are like, can we change this by 0.23%? And I'm happy to do it, but back then there was really none of that. You just sent it off, and it was either, if it was so bad, then yeah, you would say, let's redo this, but you weren't going to get too detailed. So yeah, so by default, I was mastering some stuff just because, budgets were lower, and someone had to do it. Basically, the last person that touched it mastered it. So, I'd record it and mix it, and then I would do some basic mastering, making sure the songs are all the same, feel like the same loudness and fit together. So when you listen to the album or CD, you're not wanting to adjust your volume or bass and treble controls on your stereo, and that the songs flowed together. I didn't advertise myself as a mastering engineer, but there was a lot of projects that I just had to master it because no one else was going to. Occasionally we would get bigger budget stuff and I like that when we could send off the mixes to get mastered by someone else, but it just didn't happen because, in the early 2000s to send out an album for mastering through the internet either wasn't possible or it would take like a day or two to upload all the files. It was ridiculously slow internet back then, or again, FedExing it. So it wasn't super common. And I just got that, Eric from Simple Studios would basically master all the stuff he had mixed. So I just kind of got that from him. And, looking back, I would have loved to have not mastered some of the stuff I recorded, but it was just how it was at the time. But that's how I got a little bit of mastering practice. And then over the years, people just started asking me to master their album that they had already mixed. And then I thought, maybe I want to transition into this because I like the process. And
do you find that people still kind of think of, well, I love the name Mystery Room Mastering, because do you feel that people still kind of look at mastering as being kind of a mystery? Like, why do we need to get our project mastered?
And I wish I wish I could change the studio name. I don't want to say it was a joke name, but it was kind of I'm renting a space and I'm registering my business for tax reasons. I need to think of a name, and I was just chatting with, this will date it, I was chatting with a friend on AOL Instant Messenger trying to come up with names for it, and just kind of stopped. I have a few names I would rather call it, but then you have to start over with branding and websites, and it's a lot of restarting. But yeah, I do think some people don't understand. I get some people that say, I'm told that I have to have my album mastered, so here it is, and they don't even know what's going to happen. And then there's some people that think I can do, like I've had people say, can you reduce the reverb on the drums, or can you add some effects to the backing vocals and mastering? And it's like, no, it's like I can't. It's not where you do that part of the it's baked into the mix. So I get some people that don't understand what it is, and I do get some people that sort of overestimate what can happen in mastering. Like they think they can record and mix their album themselves for the first time and then send it to me and it's going to sound like a world-class album. And you can only do so much in mastering, like even the greatest mastering engineer of all time can only do so much with what they're given. Mixing and recording and production is really where the big stuff happens that usually makes the album sound amazing or not. And the mastering is, I kind of equate it to like photo touching or color correction for video. It's like you can't change what's there. You can only just make sure it's presented as nicely as possible, like framing a photo or retouching a photo, enhancing the photo. But you're not going to make. It's not a super transformative process for the most part.
Did you feel like you had kind of more time to focus on one thing when you started focusing exclusively on mastering and kind of moving away from the recording, where you could actually dive more into mastering and sort of tailor your gear towards only mastering instead of, just tons of microphones or whatever you might need?
Yeah, and not so much the gear, but specifically like the monitoring. Like the mastering studio is all about having really great monitoring so you can hear what it sounds like and know what changes need to be made. Like you mentioned, like recording studios have to buy 1 million microphones, 1 million microphone stands, cables, instruments. There's a lot of stuff. Whereas mastering, it's like you can, if you're going to start a mastering studio today, you would buy like the best speakers you could and do the best acoustic treatment to your room that you could. And the rest can be done digitally with software. So you don't need a ton of like stuff. So yeah, it helped me focus, it helped me improve my monitoring system and my focus and attention to detail, because there's the part of mastering that people notice the most is like, making it louder and bigger and more, for some types of music, more aggressive and more into, just better. But there's also a whole quality control and detail process to it that is hard to do if you just have like, $200 speakers, because you're going to miss a lot of information. Or if your room isn't tuned well. I mean, sometimes I get stuff to master and I put it on and it's like so bright that I can say, whoever mixed this must have really dull, dark sounding speakers, because there's no way, because when I put it on my system, the treble is just painful to listen to. Or sometimes I put stuff on and the low end is so extreme that I say they must have mixed this on really small speakers in a weird room, because in their room it didn't sound like it had all this boomy weirdness, but when you put it in a neutral listening environment, it sounds a little bit weird. And sometimes I do what I can in mastering. Not too often, but it's not outside of the realm to say, you might want to adjust your mixes a little bit more before I get started, because they're pretty off. The low end is out of control and I can only do so much. So yeah, it was one of those things where like I was mastering albums in the 2000s, but it was almost like I didn't know what I didn't know about the rest of the process. And so once I made that transition to only mastering, I just learned even so much more, like things I didn't even know I had to know about. So it was cool. It was good education. I'm still learning, as technology evolves, formats evolve, streaming, when I started recording and even mastering, streaming wasn't a thing. Like the iTunes store existed, but Spotify didn't exist, and streaming services didn't exist at that time. They were just starting to come around.
Did that sort of make mastering more murky as far as people's expectations?
A little bit, because it's getting better now with high-resolution streaming, but at the time, the resolution of streaming from iTunes and Spotify was not great, so you had to sort of account for what's going to happen when you take a nice high-resolution file and reduce the amount of data. Back in the Napster days, I'm sure when you would download songs, the high end would sound all swirly, and it's in a toilet bowl. The cymbals would just be sound all swooshy and weird. And then the loudness thing too. What people don't realize is when you install Spotify on your phone, and most streaming services now, it has a loudness normalization turned on. And that's basically setting all the songs to the same level. And for most modern music, it's turning it down anywhere from 4 to 5, 6 decibels. So people from the CD era want the loudest master ever, which I understand. But then sometimes they're disappointed when they hear it on streaming because we've ruined the dynamics and we've crushed all the dynamics out of it, and it's just this big square wave. So we've lost the dynamics, and then they lose the volume because it's turned down 6 or 7 decibels. So they're just really disappointed with how it translates sometimes to streaming. You can turn that off, but most listeners don't know about that setting on their phone, which is more and more becoming default setting. When you get a new iPhone, Apple Music, the sound check button is turned on. That means it's normalizing all the songs to a certain level, and in most cases with modern music turning it down. So it's a little unpredictable, and they're still changing stuff. Even in the last few years, Spotify has changed their way they measure music and what level they set it to. So it's a bit of a moving target. So that's why I said I'm always learning and adapting and being aware of the changes that are happening in the way that people listen to music.
We've got a question here from Bob Minter. He asked if an artist is focused on a vinyl release, does that change your mastering process?
It's always great to know about that ahead of time. The way that I work, it's not a big deal to make a vinyl master later, because I don't want to get too into the weeds, but if I'm mastering an album from scratch, I work in a way that if someone wants to do vinyl, once the digital is approved, I can make what I call a vinyl-friendly master, which usually means removing or reducing some of the digital limiting that's used to make a loud digital master that people want. You've seen the waveforms, they're big brick walls. It's debatable whether that is good or bad in general, but that doesn't translate to vinyl very well at all. So I'm able to undo that in my mastering session. I can say, okay, now whether I know about it ahead of time, that's always nice, especially because I can educate people on the length of their record. I've got people that try to do 50-minute albums on vinyl, and that's just too much time to fit on a 12-inch disc. So then I can say, you may want to consider removing a song for the vinyl version. And sometimes they're like, yeah, but then I also want to remove it for the CD so they match. And sometimes they just say, or just for the vinyl, we'll have less songs. Also in terms of sequencing, I can say, your sides are going to be 22 minutes, which is kind of long for vinyl to have 22 minutes on each side. But if you put an acoustic or sparse song at the end of each side, that's going to sound better than putting your loudest, most intense song at the end of each side. So sometimes if I know about it ahead of time, I can help the client or band arrange their album so that it translates well to vinyl, just in terms of thinking about the length of sides and where certain songs are on the album. But also, like I said, the way I work, if someone wants to do a vinyl release a year later, which happens, I can easily open up my mastering session and still fine-tune it for vinyl. And we can still remove songs at that point if it's too long, or if for some reason the loudest, most intense song ends up being the last song on side A, we can adjust the song order so that's the first song on side B, and just things that are going to make it sound better on vinyl. But what I can't do, and what people ask me about a lot, is, hey, we mastered our album somewhere else because we wanted to just do it really cheap and fast, but now we want to do vinyl. Can you master our album for vinyl? And what I can't do is take their squashed digital master and make it vinyl friendly. People ask me that somewhat often, and it's kind of a bummer because I have to say, you're better off having the person that did the cheap, quick mastering make the vinyl master, but a lot of times those people don't know how to do it. So it's like now they're paying for me to, they could have just paid me to master it for digital the first time. And then, because to make the vinyl master is not that much more time. You know, it's like, it's not a huge, I don't have to do it twice. I don't have to do it for digital and vinyl. It's like I do the digital, it gets approved. Then I take a short little left turn for vinyl and it's done. It's fairly easy. But if I'm starting from scratch and, you know, if they've already released it digitally, that now they're paying me to do the heavy lifting and the vinyl when they, you know, they if they would have thought ahead a little bit, they could have had me master it for digital too instead of, so sometimes people cheap out and then it ends up coming back to bite them if they want to do vinyl and have me do it, because now they're paying me. They could have just had me do the whole thing in the first place and it would have been the same amount of cost. But I know people don't always have that kind of foresight. But well, I know what can you remind me the original question again? I just want to make sure I hit it.
Yeah, it was just if an artist is focused on a vinyl release, does that change your mastering process?
Not so much the process. I mean, not so much the process. Just it's one of those things that's good to know. And I can also tell the artist, like, you know, if you want me to do an insanely loud digital master, we can, but the vinyl is not going to have that same digital limiting crush. So if you want them to be a little more similar, we should maybe go a little bit more moderate on the digital master too. But again, I'm not painting myself into a corner where I'm stuck with this crushed thing that I have to try to make, you know, because vinyl just doesn't handle the brick wall waveforms. You know, the needle likes to move around, and if it's a brick wall, it's like same like if you're looking at a VU meter, a loudness meter, if it's just doing nothing, you know, that doesn't translate to vinyl very well, and it's not fun to listen to. And they usually have to cut the vinyl a little quieter if it's a brick wall, which means then you're hearing more noise floor of the surface noise between songs or the quiet parts. And you can put anything on vinyl really, but it depends on your expectations too. It's like some people expect it to sound as good as or better than the digital. Some people get really freaked out if they hear a little tick or pop from the vinyl. And then again, like I told you before we went on there, some especially like artist managers, they're like, we don't care how the vinyl sounds at all because we know that no one's going to listen to it. They're going to buy it and hang it on the wall or whatever, which is a cool way. It's a cool way to still support bands and artists you like, to buy something physical from them. But it's a huge spectrum of expectations with vinyl. It's like sometimes people ask me, you know, how much time can I fit on a vinyl record? And my answer is, you know, how bad do you want it to sound? Because you can do 24-minute sides, but it's not going to be an enjoyable listen for the most part. So I feel like I'm always the bad news guy, but I'm like, guys, you know, if your record's too long to be on vinyl, you got to remove a few songs. And sometimes people are like, well, what if we just put the songs closer together? I'm like, well, you're gaining like 4 seconds. You need to gain like 4 minutes. So it's usually removing a song or doing, you know, sometimes I'll do a vinyl edit of if a record's a little long, but there's one like 8-minute song, I'll be like, why don't we do a 3 or 4 minute edit of that song for the vinyl? And it'll sound so much better in the end. So yeah, vinyl is really about managing expectations too, because aside from everything I said, you know, when I send out a master to get CDs made, the CDs either play or they don't play, and the packaging either looks great or not, but that's not my department. But with vinyl, the sound can go from anywhere from awesome to terrible after it leaves my hands, and it's not really in my control. It depends who's cutting the lacquer disc or who's cutting it, you know, can make or break it. And again, if we're giving them 24-minute sides, that's a losing battle right there.
I feel people that work with you, they already know this, but you're really good with telling the artists like their options. And like you said, if it's bad news, you deliver it. You don't kind of give a cookie cutter kind of, okay, go ahead and do it. You're okay if you do that, this. And your website as well for Mr. Room Mastering is just a wealth of like links and articles that you've written regarding everything from how to get ready to submit your music to after, like things you should do as far as like submitting your music to the places that pull up the artwork and the CD information, stuff like bands might not think about that kind of stuff, but I think working with you, you kind of go the extra step to kind of empower the artist, and whether they take that information or the advice is up to them.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I found that if I'm sending the same email over and over, it's time to put it on the website as something that people can read. And yeah, I do get cases where people are like, do you need to know the song order? And I'm like, yeah, I need to know the song order. That's a big part of mastering, is putting the songs in order and adjusting the flow. You know, I'm doing a jazz album right now, and this isn't, they didn't do anything wrong, but a lot of the songs end with a piano note that just goes on forever because they just wanted to leave enough. You know, they knew we were going to trim it up in mastering, but I mean, that's part of what I do. It's kind of boring sounding, but I'm deciding how long should the note ring out before it fades to zero, and then the next song starts, or there's one that overlaps, you know, and things like that. So I like to put all the things on the website, because basically I'm a one-person business. I have a website guy that's really helpful. He takes my ideas and puts them in action, like you said, but it's really just a way for me to save time, because people can go on there and say, what information does he need to know? And yeah, knowing the song order is something I need to know. We can always, you know, if I master it and I send to the first version and you're like, oh, we want to switch around songs 6 and 7, like that's easy to do. But I really like to have a starting point. I don't like to just get a folder of songs and be like, can you master our album? Because I'm like, I need more information. You know, I need to know how does the album flow? What's the story? You know, what's the first song? What's the last song? Like I said, it's not a big deal to flip around a song, or two before we finalize it. But I need more. All that is just helping me, you know, get to the finish line faster. Like, because at some point you're going to have to know the song order and the official titles. Because, I mean, the way the files are named when they come into me are normally a mess. You know, it's not the full song title. It's not even close to the right song title. It's abbreviations. It's not the right punctuation and spellings. You know, so the website allows people to type in the official titles, because at some point they're going to have to know that before they release it. So it's like, it gets them thinking about some of the details that, especially newer bands and younger bands doing it for the first time, haven't really thought about. You know, what's the album title? And there's times, you know, when people submit to streaming, that's when they enter in the official title. So there's cases where the album title isn't relevant to me. You know, I could put in anything because they have to redo it anyway, but I like to give people like a nice MP3 package that looks good with the artwork embedded, so that if they want to send that out for promo or to friends and family, that it looks good. It doesn't have this gibberish, misspelled, you know, just, I want it to look like something that they purchased from the iTunes store where everything's spelled correctly, and, you know, so it looks good. Because you never know what people are going to send where. So I like to just get as much information up front as possible, rather than, you know, and this kind of goes back to the CD days, but so often I would like master a record, and then like 3 weeks later they'd be like, now we need to give you the official titles, and it's like, well, we could have done that. You know, I'm just trying to streamline things, and I'm not saying you can't request changes, but I'm just saying, like, let's just start thinking about this ahead of time, because you're going to have to know it. And same for preparing. You know, I get a lot of repeat bands and artists, which is nice, but, you know, also a healthy amount of new people working with me that, especially if they're mixing themselves, then they know what they need to send me to get started. So it's basically like having an assistant, but it's my website, because it accepts the information, gives people the prices, gives them a bunch of stuff that they need to know.
We do have a nice calculator on the website where you can enter the songs and the lengths, and it'll give you a kind of an estimate.
Yeah, that's something that's really great about mastering, is it's very predictable, like the amount of time it's going to take me. That's something that producers and mix engineers probably couldn't do, because, you know, to mix a song that has acoustic guitar and vocals versus mixing Bohemian Rhapsody is going to be a much different amount of time. So you can't really put that on your website. You know, you got to know the scope of the mix to know how long it's going to take. But mastering, it's honestly, you know, if a song has acoustic guitar and vocals or is a rock opera, it's going to take me about the same amount of time to master it, because I'm just working with the stereo mix. So, I mean, I'm not getting in there and putting effects on backing vocals and, you know, EQing violins versus drum. You know, it's like, there's only so much I can do. And honestly, acoustic stuff is sometimes more time intense because you can hear all the clicks and pops and thumps and stuff that you may want to clean up and get out of there. The only time things go fast, because I've had people ask me, can you master my album? It's only acoustic guitar and vocals, or only piano and vocals, and that honestly takes just as long as a rock thing. The only time it goes a little faster is when there's no vocals. Vocals are just challenging because they present all sorts of problems with sibilance and mouth clicks and just harsh frequencies. The voice is an interesting instrument, so it's like anytime I'm doing something without vocals, it goes a little faster, but it could be a solo piano or a crazy instrumentation, but the fact that there's no vocals just usually helps it go a little faster. That's kind of the one thing I've noticed over the years. But yeah, the website does have a pretty accurate cost calculator, so you can see how much it's going to cost, and then if you're going to do vinyl, it's a little bit more. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not like double. I don't have to do it twice. I just have to branch off a little bit. And the other thing too is, like, for vinyl masters, I usually send one file for each side of the record because you don't want the cutting engineer to have to guess which order or accidentally mix up the song order, or accidentally add 2 seconds more between the songs that you've already dialed in. So I just give them one file for each side, and with a PDF that has where each song starts, so they can put the visual. A lot of people think that band between songs is like silence, but when they're cutting the lacquer disc, they press a special button on their lathe, and it spaces out the grooves, so you as the listener can know where to drop the needle to start song 3, or if you want to skip to song 3 or 4. So I have to give them that information, because you might think it's obvious, but if you're cutting 10 records a day, you don't know if it's a new song or if it's just a bridge, or you got to have that documentation to get it right. So part of the vinyl mastering process too is creating that single file for each side with a documentation of where each song starts and any weird notes. Like, if I've done a couple records that are purposely in mono, and you'd want to put that on the documentation to say this is meant to be in mono. It wasn't a mistake when I exported it, because they don't want to cut lacquers and do test pressings and then have someone say, oops, we accidentally sent you a mono file. Can you redo it with the new stereo file? I mean, it's rare, but okay, I'll put any special notes like that, or there's talking at the end of side B that is supposed to be, it's a funny thing that they wanted to keep at the end of the record, so don't cut it off or don't miss it. There's a little hidden thing at the end. So I mean, vinyl mastering can be that too, just communication of what's supposed to be there. And
when you're done, you'll send an email with download links to the different quality WAV files, MP3s, and I think you mentioned LimeWire or Napster earlier. I think there was a period in the early 2000s where people thought smaller file sizes were better. So if they were sending like MP3s to people, it would be like, well, I'll send the 2 megabit.
Yeah, I mean, because back then it just took forever to send files through the internet, and it was like, I mean, I dabbled a little bit in Napster and LimeWire when it came out, but I quickly started to question the quality of I'm like, this sounds terrible. Like, I know it's free, but I don't even want this if it's free. It's not really. I'm not a huge audio snob, but even back then I could tell, like, am I getting the actual best generation of this, or is it back then too, there was still the aspect of someone could have used a cassette tape and digitized it. And that's, so I didn't get too into the file sharing thing back in the day, but I'm aware of how bad it sounded at the time. But yeah, I mean, I send out a nice comprehensive list because it's not, back in the 90s, the CD master was the master, and it was just that. But now that we have streaming, most distributors accept high resolution files for streaming. CD Baby is the main one that does not. And I don't always get to ask people what distributor they're using, DistroKid or CD Baby. So I just send kind of a nice list of any files that they're going to need, whether it's distribution, vinyl. People are still making cassettes here and there. And again, not that you use MP3s for distribution, but people do send out MP3s for promo use, friends and family and stuff like that. So I like to make sure it has all the metadata and stuff just organized nicely. It doesn't take long for you to make it. I'd rather make it myself and know that it's correct than have people have to load something into iTunes or Windows Media Player and do who knows what to it. Like I said, make a 2 megabyte version because it fits in an email. I just give, I want people to not have to alter the files that I send out in any way. I want it's just done, and everything from high resolution to low vinyl. CDs take a special format too that most people don't know about and shouldn't have to know about. But I just want to make sure that they have everything they need and don't accidentally send the wrong file to be used for something.
We got a question here from Mark Goldie at Rock Garden Studios.
Oh, hey, Mark.
Yeah, he asks, do you have any sonic pet peeves from mix engineers?
I think none from Mark, by the way. Mark's mixes are always perfect, and I mean that. Mark's done great, and I appreciate all the projects Mark sent. But pet peeves two things. The biggest thing that I usually notice in the studio is sibilance, the S sounds. Again, on cheaper speakers or just inattentive listening, you might not realize how loud the S's are compared to the rest of the voices. They make a special tool for it called the de-esser. So I'm not just making this up. It is a real problem. But I think that tends to get overlooked, and then people want their masters, not always, and more hyped up and louder and intense, and then what used to be kind of borderline sibilance problem becomes an even bigger problem because you're just accentuating everything that's there. But honestly, one of the bigger pet peeves is, and it's more of a trend, people that are mixing, they either need to or want to put a limiter on their mixes to make it as loud as a mastered thing, because when they send it to their mix, the bands want to hear their mix sound like it's a finished record, like when they compare it to their favorite album, that it's the same level. And that gets a little tricky because people mix through limiters, and then when they remove that for me to master from, things can change a lot. Like if they're mixing through a processor and then they remove that, maybe their mix decisions weren't what they thought they were. Or maybe an error. I've had this happen too, where people make the version for mastering without the limiting. Sometimes stuff gets muted or a glitch or an error happens, and a lot of times people don't listen to those files that I'm mastering from and then they don't hear it till I'm done mastering it, and then they realize, oops, we had the backing vocals were muted or something, and then I have to do it again basically with the correct file. So no major pet peeves, just sibilance, and then the other thing too is like if a mix engineer is putting a limiter on their mixes and maybe they're going a little too hard, now I basically have to go to that same place, because if I do a little more natural, organic level and master, even if it maybe sounds better, everyone's used to hearing it a notch louder. So then they compare, like, why is the master version a little bit quieter? And then it kind of ties back to the streaming thing, where it's like, even my less loud master is still going to get turned down. So why are we destroying it only to have it destroyed and turned down? You could have it be not totally destroyed and turned down a little less, and it survives a little better. I mean, it's not just me. I listen to a lot of other podcasts with mastering engineers, and everyone's battling the same thing. And some people are battling it from, like, mixers are. They'll say, well, I mixed it that way because the rough mix from the producer was insanely destroyed, and I had to, like, so it's kind of like, I don't know what the right word for it is, but you kind of just have to, sometimes you get stuck in these loops and traps of having to do stuff you wouldn't necessarily like to do just because it's already been previously crushed and demolished with loudness and limiting. And it's not a common thing, but it does happen where it's like, and I've had stuff come in where it's just so, the mixes are so loud and stuff, I'm like, I can't do anything with this, it's like handing someone a burnt piece of pizza and saying, can you make me a really nicely, perfectly cooked pizza? And you're like, no, you can't go backwards on this. Like, it's not that simple. So sometimes stuff just too overcooked to work on it. And again, that all ties back to, like, having not great monitoring. It might sound good in your room on these small speakers in this untreated or not great treated room, but as you get nicer monitoring, you can hear some of the distortion and harshness and things that, are only going to get worse as it travels through the streaming ecosystem, because then the quality gets reduced a little bit, Spotify especially. So
as far as storing all this stuff, so you have worked on so many projects. Every project you end up saving, so if a band needs to come back to, they can.
Yep. Yeah, basically, in the old days, I would have to, when I was done with a project, I would archive it on DVDs because they stored a lot more data than a CD. And but that got to be a little impractical because I had boxes and boxes of DVDs, and they weren't updatable. If you burn a DVD, it's a burned DVD. So eventually I switched to hard drive archives. And in the old days, I had the one. So I basically have a huge network of hard drives now for archiving projects when they're done, because especially what's happening now is people are doing singles and another single and another single over the course of a year or two. And then at some point they want to make an album involving some or all of those singles and maybe a few new songs. So I need to have everything easily recallable, So basically I have a working hard drive for all the projects in progress, and then when they're done, I put them on an archive system. And I think I'm up to like 40 terabytes of project archives now. And it's not just the master files, though. It's their original mixes, and it's my work in progress, my mastering sessions, all the working files, and then, of course, the final masters. So it does end up being a lot of data. And, I think with producers and mix engineers, some of them still pass, when they're done mixing a project, they might pass the files on to the artist and say, this is your responsibility now. So if you ever want to remix it, you have the files and I don't. But with mastering, the sessions are a lot smaller in general, but there's more of them. So it ends up being about the same. But yeah, I think I'm up to 40 terabytes. And not only that, but I think I have 9 archive hard drives, and they're all very big, like 6 and 8 terabytes. And then each one of those drives has a mirrored backup. I use a program called Carbon Copy Cloner. So each drive has a mirrored physical backup that I keep in a safe. So like if my studio started on fire, I would have a version in the safe that hopefully didn't start on fire. And on top of that, each of those drives are in the cloud with Backblaze. So I have 3 copies of everything, and it's growing. And like I was saying before, and we were saying earlier, sometimes people will do a record and then a year later they want to release it on vinyl, and I can very, very easily recall it. Within a few seconds, I have all my archives mounted to my computer, and I have a program that catalogs all the files. So I can search it and say, okay, this project's on archive 7, and I can get to it very quickly. I see some people that try to do this, but they have years of random weird hard drives that have different power adapters, and they don't know where the adapter is for that one, and it's in this closet, and they don't know if this hard drive is going to power up, and that, to me, that's just a waste of time. So I have everything nice in one big enclosure so that I just flip it on and all my archives are there. And whether it's combining a bunch of singles to make an EP or an album, or making a vinyl master for something, or just I'm starting to get to the point where stuff's getting remastered. It's 10, 15, 20 years old now. So yeah, it just saves me time to have it all. And sometimes it also, it's expensive to keep track of all this, because over the years I've refreshed the hard drives a few times, because hard drives have a shelf life. So it does cost money, but I found that the fact that I have this stuff pays for itself, because someone will say, hey, remember that project we did? We want to rework it, and then I get the project. So it pays for itself. But it is, every few months I'll just put all the projects that are approved on this archive system, and then it's backed up in 2 additional spots. But even stuff like, I did the Old Dirty Bastard 25th anniversary or something. And then I didn't know they were going to do this, but, almost a year later they wanted to do a Record Store Day release. So I had to make a vinyl version. I think it was just the instrumentals too. So you're expected to have this stuff, whether it's, someone's first band or major label stuff. When they emailed me about it, they didn't say, here's the files again, or do you need the files again? It was like, hey, can you make this real quick? And it's like, okay, I can make that real quick because I have everything archived and organized, and it's just a big part of it. And even down to people, bands are just not good at keeping track of their files. I get so many emails like, hey, we lost our masters, or I got a new computer, and I don't know where the files are. And on top of all that, I have all my outgoing masters in Dropbox. So like, if you know how to search your email from years ago, all the links still work. So a lot of times, and I just got tired of people asking me for their files, kind of. I was like, I'm just going to get Dropbox Unlimited so that all the links stay active for, going on 6 or 7 years now. So sometimes, I don't even know, sometimes people might search their email and not even have to contact me for their files, which is nice. That was the whole point of it. But even if they do, all I do is search my email and resend that email that I sent, and the links are still good. So it just saves me time to be organized. Like I don't want to be fishing through closets for different hard drives with different power adapters and Firewire 400, 800. We did the whole Firewire 400, 800, USB 3. I don't want to deal with any of that. I just want to turn on a switch and have all my stuff come up, and that's basically what happens.
You've done like a ton of major label stuff. What are some of the major label projects that you've worked on in the past?
Well, I guess working backwards is easiest. Just did, what did I do? I don't even know.
Didn't you do a new Replacements?
Yeah, Replacements has been fun to do those box sets, the deluxe versions, because they dig up a lot of bonus tracks and live shows. And then you get to remaster the album. Ed Stasium just remixed the Tim album by the Replacements, which is kind of a fan favorite for the songs, but a lot of people didn't love the mix. It sounds very weird. And then it got even weirder in the original mastering. So Ed did a good job of remixing that. But that's for Rhino Records, and did stuff like En Vogue and Shania Twain, and
I saw the New Kids on the Block.
New Kids on the Block, yeah. To be honest, I didn't even know they made that record in 2008. It was like a comeback album. They had like Lady Gaga, who I don't think was super well known at the time, and a lot of big artists on that. I don't know. You'd have to look at the website. Jellyfish is kind of a, most, not a household name, but most musicians and engineers know Jellyfish. That was a cool one.
When you get these projects, it's just a mixed version of the original for you to
yeah, sometimes
remaster?
It's digital transfers of the unmastered mixes. Occasionally, it's unfortunate. Occasionally, all that's left are the digital masters, and I have to do my best to
unburn the pizza.
Yeah, unburn the pizza, or just honestly, if it's already great, just kind of leave it alone. That sometimes they want to add bonus tracks and things like that. That's the cool thing about mastering, is some stuff needs very little work. It's like already sounds amazing, and some stuff needs a little help. And then when you're combining songs from different mix engineers, studios, eras, then it's all about making them feel cohesive together as a group that you want to listen to, and then formatting it for vinyl and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at the website or Instagram to think of other ones. But
do you typically collect the finished products for the stuff you work on?
I'm starting to do so much of it that I can't, and to be honest, some of it's not stuff I
would want to
collect.
I
mean, I always appreciate the work, but like the replacement stuff, yeah, I like to collect all that, especially because this guy Bob Mayer has been doing the liner notes. He wrote the Replacements the book, and his liner notes are really good, and they always come up with really cool photos and book. That's the thing. Streaming is convenient, but the box sets are awesome because you get really cool pictures and Bob's liner notes and something you can collect. I try to keep a couple of them sealed for the future and then open one to read it and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's getting to the point where I'm running out of space for stuff to collect. I'm trying to not bring more stuff in if I don't. I'm trying to keep that to a minimum because mastering is just such a high volume job that there's a lot of stuff I don't get copies of, and that's okay too, because realistically, it's going to sit on a shelf. If I want to listen to it, I'm going to listen to it on streaming myself. So, but occasionally there's stuff I really want to make sure I get a copy of.
This is kind of a silly question, but when you're mastering, are you typically just sitting in a regular office chair, or do you have a comfortable sort of setup that you can sit back?
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. I do have a very nice Herman Miller chair. It feels like you're sitting on a pillow or a cloud. Not a pillow's about. It feels like you're sitting in air, basically suspending in air. And yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I could get away with sitting on a crappy chair that, but as you get older, you're like, wow, I need. And honestly, once I started working at like Smart Studios, they had the fancy chairs. I'm like, wow, these are nice chairs. I didn't think I would ever could justify the cost of them, but I've purchased a few over the years now. And I haven't even got to use it. It came on Friday, but I bought a saddle stool, kind of like how doctors sit on. It's like no back, just to kind of change up the posture throughout the day. Because I actually had to redo the floor in my studio. It was kind of a big ordeal. So everything came out, and I'm rethinking things. I'm rethinking how much vinyl and CDs do I need in the studio, because it's just growing and growing, and got to declutter a bit. But I also, I had a nice chair already, but I'm like, I'm going to get a saddle. And I also got a standing desk because I have this other setup on the other side of the room with just really nice headphones, and I can do a lot of work with that, a lot of quality control work, you can do a lot of work without speakers now in the mastering because of these great headphones. So I have a standing desk, so I can stand up and get stuff done, and it's just better. It's good to not sit all day. It's a very sedentary job, so you gotta change it up. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, traditionally, sitting in a nice Herman Miller chair makes all the difference compared to sitting on a kitchen chair, or even like a cheap Office Max chair. I mean, those are fine, but if you're gonna sit there all day, it's good to be comfortable. When
you're working at Smart Studios, did you get to run in much with Butch? I think I saw somewhere too that you kind of you digitized his first recording. Is that accurate?
We're working on one of his earlier productions at Smart. This band called Mensch. It's like I think they officially only had a 7-inch out, in the maybe around 83 or so. But it goes for a lot of money on Discogs. And there's a guy from Madison he was originally just going to reissue that, but now other recordings have surfaced. Like they were on this weird compilation cassette tape, and there's a practice tape, and maybe a live. It's going to turn into a full album, I think. But it's based around this original 4-song thing that Butch did at Smart Studios, and for a while we thought the tape was gone, so I digitized a mint copy of the 7-inch, thinking that's the best source that we had to remaster from. But after some deep digging, it turns out that Henry Rollins had the analog tape. Because what would happen is, in the old days, you would send the analog reel to the pressing plant to get records made. And if it was a small band, that reel tape might not ever got sent back. The pressing plant probably kept it for a couple of years and then threw it away. That happened a lot. So we thought the tape got thrown away. But Henry Rollins is a big archivist of hardcore music, especially. And I don't know who got in touch with who, but he had the tape. So then we had the actual analog tape digitized, which is going to be obviously a way better source to remaster from. But we're still collecting sources on that. But that was one of Butch's, I think, earlier Smart Studios production. I don't think it was his first by any means, but early Butch Vig production at Smart Studios.
Projects like that are pretty cool. Like just kind of archiving and
he remembered it. I reached out to him because when Smart closed, they found a bunch of tapes and just had them digitized and threw them on a hard drive for just to get them preserved for future. So I reached out to him to see if that had been one of them, and they didn't have any record of having that digitized, which now we know why, because Henry Rollins had the tape, which was a cool story. But I didn't get to work with Butch much at all at Smart, because when I started working there, Garbage at the time, I think it was Bleed Like Me, the album, they had just finished that, and they were going out on tour. And I think he might have had a few health things going on. He was mostly living in California, so I only did one session with him. And that's because Mike's circle got stuck in Mexico due to a hurricane. And I remember when Mike came back, he had he's not a beard guy, but Mike had a beard because they got stuck in Mexico for at least a few days. But they're supposed to do this session with Freedy Johnston. I always say it wrong, Johnson or Johnston.
I think it's Johnston, but I always say it wrong too.
I know a few Johnstons. Yeah, Freedy. Anyway, Freedy was doing a session, and Duke, and I think Duke was producing it. And Butch was just going to play drum. It was more of a fun hangout thing, and so me and Bo Sorensen, who were the young guys at Smart at the time, who were also not stuck in a hurricane and able to come in, we did that session, and Butch was on drum. It was cool. That's the most I really got to hang out with him, and I saw him a little bit. There was a music conference in Madison maybe 5-6 years ago now. I forgot what it was called. Between the Waves or something, I think it's called. He was there for that, so I got to hang out a bit. But no, I didn't spend much time with him at Smart just because of Garbage was doing a reunion thing at the time, and yeah, not a whole lot of interactions.
This is a new segment that I guess we're starting today. My twin brother Tony's going to come in for a little co-host questioning here, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, see, he's got a notepad and everything.
That's always scary.
Are you a Beatles fan?
I am a Beatles fan. My dad or parents had gotten me, when CDs first started coming out, I think 87 was when the Beatles albums started coming out on CD, and I remember having most of those the very first CD issues of the Beatles records, so I was into them. And then, like I said, that 5th grade teacher was a major Beatles fan, so that really kind of expedited that. So yeah, I would say I'm a pretty big Beatles. And I got to see Paul McCartney at Paul McCartney at County Stadium, and I know it was my last day of 6th grade because I got to miss the last day of school, and I bought my teacher a shirt from the concert as a consolation prize for missing his last day of school. So I saw McCartney. It was the Off the Ground tour at County Stadium. Nice. Then I saw him again. I kind of took it for I should have seen him more, but when he played at Lambeau Field about 4 or 5 years ago now,
2019,
I was like, I can't miss Paul McCartney at Lambeau Field. That's two legendary things right there. I got to go see that. And I wasn't expecting Paul McCartney 1965 voice level, but right. I thought he still sounded very good. And I also thought, wow, we got there an hour too early. We listened to 2 hours of pre-show music, which was the Beatles. He plays Beatles music before the concert, and then he played a 3-hour show. That's 5 hours of Paul and the Beatles, and I still could have gone for more. Not many people can get away with that.
Well, have you heard any of the new mixes from Giles Martin?
A little bit, and I follow some of the commentary. There's mixed feelings about it. I think in general I like the new mixes, at least because, I experienced this with the Tim album when that got remixed by the Replacements. Some people are nostalgic for the old mixes. Some people love the new mixes, and they'll never listen to the old ones. And some people like the new mixes because you can hear things that were buried or missing or hard to hear on the original mix, but then when you go back and listen to the old one, you can kind of hear them. Yeah. So the new mixes can be cool just for exposing what got recorded but wasn't always audible. But honestly, with what I do now, I don't get a whole lot of time for casual music listening anymore because I'm always working on music, and when I'm not in the studio, it's more like I listen to podcasts or nothing.
Yeah, that's a question I had too, is if you actually are able to listen to music for pleasure anymore.
Not as much. I do get, occasionally if I'm working on an album, someone will give me some references, like, hey, we really like this album, how it sounds or how loud it is, and I'll get to listen to that. And occasionally it'll expose me to something I really like, and I'll keep, listen to it for fun. And as I've, I got new speakers last year, so I was listening to a lot of, I made a playlist of stuff I know sounds great, not, just classic albums that I think sound great. So that gave me the chance to listen to music for fun again. And I just had to move everything out of my studio and back in, so I had to reset up the speakers. So I've been listening to stuff again for fun instead of work. But for the most part, I don't get a lot of casual listening time anymore, it comes with the territory, I guess.
Yeah, and thinking about how things have changed since you first got into music, and now with just so many people recording at home now. And that's probably changed the type of work you're getting, the type of stuff you're getting, but also now talk about the Beatles with Then and Now with the new, I don't know what they call it, the technology that can separate tracks.
AI?
Yeah, but it's called something else.
Yeah, I mean, AI is a weird word because it's not like they typed in lyrics and told it to sound like John Lennon. It's actually his voice. They used very cool technology to separate his voice from the piano, which was not possible even just a couple of years ago. And speaking of Jellyfish, someone posted on the Jellyfish fan page group or whatever on Facebook, there's an iPhone app with you can play music through it, and there's 5 or 6 sliders, so you can, even on your phone now, you can solo just the vocals, and it does a pretty good job of. It's kind of crazy. You can remix songs that are just the stereo mix. So, yeah, I mean, I actually only was able to listen to the new song on my AirPods a couple times because I've had a lot going on, moving stuff around in the studio, but it was cool. I mean, I'll take any new Beatles song. Yeah. I really love the thing that Paul and Rick Rubin did, the 3-2-1. Did you see that?
Yep, I did.
I wish there was a lot more of that footage, and the Get Back thing was good to see.
So you mentioned, we talk a lot about the replacements. Did Tommy Stintson ever get you into a Guns N' Roses show?
I could have. The very first time I met him, actually. First time I met him, Tim and John from the Obsoletes had already been playing a little bit with him live. But Guns N' Roses was on tour, and he also had a new solo album out. And on that tour, he was doing in-store record appearances, solo acoustic, before the Guns N' Roses show, just whatever. But when in Chicago, someone had the idea to have basically me, Tim, and John back him up, full band in-store in Chicago. And I hadn't met him, but I learned the songs, and I met him about 10 or 20 minutes before we played the songs. And he offered, I could have gone to the Guns N' Roses show that night in Chicago, but I decided to go back. I forgot why. I was probably doing I was probably just too busy or something. But I could have gone. I know Tim and John went, or at least Tim did, I think. But I could have. But then, honestly, as I was playing with him more, he was kind of phasing out of Guns N' Roses, and because he had a daughter that was young and he wanted to be around for and not be traveling so much. So my time with Tommy sort of intersected with him dialing back the Guns N' Roses touring, aside from that early, one-off in-store.
Yes, he played with both Bash and Pop, which is Tommy Stinson's band, and he also did Screeching Weasel. What were some of the similarities between playing in those two bands and some of the differences?
The similarities were comfortable travel, songs that existed, even, as the Obsoletes ended, I was I filled in on a bass with Corey Chisel for a little bit, played with Blue Heels for a little bit. I was kind of I didn't have the energy to be in a band, creative side of it. It was more I enjoyed the playing part, jumping into situations where songs existed. And with Screeching Weasel, it was really easy because those songs were ingrained in my head. So, it was easy to learn them. And Tommy was a little trickier just because he really wanted to do his new stuff, whereas Ben from Screeching Weasel, it was a lot of the old classics and occasionally not much new stuff, a little bit of new stuff. But Tommy was the opposite, where it was he was really into the latest record and wanted to do that. So that involved a lot more learning of songs that I wasn't as familiar with. So a little more homework on that, but both of them were very easy-going. Especially, I wasn't nervous to play with Tommy, but it's kind of weird to play bass for a bass player, because why aren't you playing the bass? But it's easier to play guitar and sing than play bass and sing lead vocals. So he wanted to do the guitar singer thing. So,
do you think it's fair to say that you're a better bass player than Tommy Stintson?
No, not at all. I kind of did the Cliff Notes version of a lot of his bass fills, and I did enough to get it done. But he's way more intuitive with little fills and runs. I don't know how to read note. I don't think he knows how to read notes either. But scales, I played it a little more on the safe side. I'd rather just not hit a brown note than try to do something fancy. I kept it a little more simplified, just out of necessity, because we didn't practice a ton. We'd usually get together at his house the day before a tour and kind of do half of all the songs. And then, so there wasn't a lot of, I had to play a little safer. Especially like with Tommy, some of the older songs that he would do, he would misremember parts a little bit. Like I remember there was a bridge for a song or two where he didn't quite, I had to anticipate if he was going to play it the right way or his new way. Kind of on the, I had to like have one ear on what I'm doing and one ear on what's, because like lead guitar, you can get away with noodling a little more if it's in the right key, and drums are drums. But like with bass, you kind of got to be playing the right part as the main guy. You got to stick close to that. So definitely not a better bass player, but I'm honored that he didn't ever tell me what to do or that I was doing it wrong or kick me out.
You did Stephen Colbert with Bash and Pop. How was that experience? Was that at the Ed Sullivan Theater?
It was.
So being a Beatles fan, that had to be kind of a cool experience.
A very cool
I
experience.
don't think I was aware of this.
A little weird because it's like, especially with someone of Tommy's, he's not, it's not like you're the Beatles. I'd say a fraction of the audience was aware of who he was. It's not like a Bash and Pop or Tommy concert where 80 to 90% of the people are there to see you. It was more like opposite. And we did obviously do a sound check, but you kind of come out cold. And it's not live, so if you really screwed up, you could start over, but it's not ideal or encouraged to start over on a song. So you're kind of coming out cold. You don't really ever warm up. And it's kind of like playing in a shopping mall. 'Cause it's kind of like this. The lights are bright. It's very unnatural. But I understand why they do it, because they have to make it look good on TV.
Did they pay for travel?
I think, we were already on tour, so we were already out there. I mean, I did get a performance check from it once. It wasn't very much, but, you had to sign paperwork and do taxes and stuff.
Do you snoop around the theater at all?
Not too much. I've mentioned this on social media. It was very odd because it was like, what was it? It was, there was some political stuff going on at the time. I'll just say that. And so it was kind of a weird, ominous feeling in the air. And you're just in the basement and you can see TV screens of what's happening, the actual show. But it was kind of weird because we played a song that on the album it fades out. And Tommy's manager we were like, how do we end this on a TV? We don't want to go on and on a live TV. There's only so much time. So Tommy's manager at the time had the idea of Colbert to come out and start unplugging the instruments. Because the song just goes on and on, the same two chords. So he did that. But what wasn't planned was Tommy and Stephen Colbert ended up getting in a wrestling match, which was real. I mean, they weren't mad at each other, but it wasn't planned. It just was like, we knew he was going to come out and unplug the stuff, but somehow they ended up doing a little bit of a wrestling match.
And you can see you in the video. You're standing right to the side of them. I mean,
I was surprised. I mean, I knew he was going to come out and stuff like that, but we didn't know it was going to turn into wrestling. But it was kind of fun.
Was that John? I'm going to butcher his name, John Bastille, or was he the music director at the time, or the?
I don't know. Probably. Now that you say that, it was all kind of a blur because it was towards the end of a tour, so we were a little bit tired, and what was I trying to say? Oh yeah, but that my whole point was you do have the opportunity to do a second take, but after the wrestling thing, I don't think anyone was feeling a second take, so that was that. That was it. I don't think it was the best performance, but we weren't going to reassemble after wrestling and reset and try another one. So that kind of decided that was a one take and out.
And you played with that band in London, I think I heard.
Yeah.
At Hyde Park with Green Day and Rancid and a bunch of other.
Yeah, I think that was my last actual live show ever.
Did you know when you walked off the stage that you're done with it?
Are you done with it?
No, I don't know if I knew that. I'd have to think a little deeper and it's probably not good to do that in real time, but on this thing. But yeah, I mean, basically we got a good offer to, because Billy Joe from Green Day is a big fan of Tommy and Replacements, so it was some like festival, Rancid, The Hives, Green Day, some other cool bands like The Damned were reformed. It was a cool all weekend thing, I think, and so they built a little tour, a UK tour around that show. That was kind of the reason that probably paid the bills to go over there. But yeah, that was a fun show, and we played more in the middle of the day. It wasn't like, it was more low key than you might expect for being Hyde Park, but it was still cool to say we played at Hyde Park and all that stuff. But it was also, it was the end of a tour. It was also when there was some pretty big bomb type things happening at concerts. So I remember thinking, like, I don't know if I want to be at Hyde Park after dark. You hate to live in fear like that, but we also had early flights, so we didn't stick around all night for the show or anything, because it was also my first time in London, and I'm like, I don't want to have to figure out how to get to the airport and this huge crowd, just so we didn't stay till the very end, but it was a cool experience.
Do you feel that you're done playing music live?
Probably. I mean, it depends what the offer is, but mostly time, like, especially with the Bash and Pop thing, I just was running out of time, like, because it started as long weekends, like, can you do this long weekend of shows? I'm like, yeah, I can get away for 3 or 4 days. But then as things got, with the record deal and everything, it was like 2 and 3 week tours. And I could do 1 or 2 or 3 week tours, but they started stacking up so much that I couldn't get any studio work momentum going. And I just had to think, like, what's a better long-term decision? I didn't foresee playing live music to be a career, whereas with mastering I had already established that is my career, I guess. So I basically just had to say I can't do this anymore. And luckily, someone stepped in on bass that had played with Tommy like in the 2000s. So I didn't want to leave him hanging. I gave him enough notice, but it just got to be, I'm like, I can't be gone for such big, and for most touring musicians, it wasn't even that bad of a thing. But for me, having my own studio business and not really loving touring in general, even though with those two, we were traveling comfortably, but there's still just so much downtime between stuff I actually had to do. And I wish I had it. Now I have a really great mobile mastering rig. Back then, it wasn't great. It wasn't very it was somewhat portable and not very great. And you're still relying on internet, like having fast internet that can upload big files easily, which sometimes happens at hotels and sometimes doesn't. And I'm like, this isn't really, I could maybe do it now because I have a great mobile setup, and if I really had to, I could probably purchase some kind of global Wi-Fi thingamajig where I always have fast speeds. But at the time, it just wasn't working. Just too much not wasted time, but too much downtime between shows and traveling and things like that.
This is kind of a topic change, but with Screeching Weasel, you recorded on the album First World Manifesto. Is that the title?
Yep. Yeah, we did that for Fat Records. We basically just did the drums at Blast House because Ben lived in Madison and could come over and kind of supervise the drums and just, make sure everything's... And it was a good sounding drum room and all that. But a lot of that we did at my first studio in Milwaukee. When I first opened Mystery Room Mastering, it formerly was a mastering room, Trevor Sadler of Mastermind, which is where if bands had any budget left, I would try to get them to go master their record, but it didn't always happen, so I ended up mastering it. But when Trevor moved, I took over that space. It was a big mastering room, and then it had I turned it into an overdub room. For him, it was his computer network room with loud computers and stuff, because computers were loud at that time. But when I moved in, I didn't need that because I had a quiet computer, and so I turned it into an overdub room because I thought I'm still recording and mixing once in a while. It'd be good to have an overdub booth. So we basically just did the drums in Madison, and then Mike Kennerty from the All American Rejects was just sort of, I won't say just getting into it, but he was, I want to say maybe somewhat new to producing. And in fact, I mixed that record, and he basically produced it, and I engineered and mixed it, and he helped mix it, and he helped with some editing and vocal comping and editing. But we kind of did a nice tag team effort on that record. But a lot, I would say other than the drums, that was all done at my own studio. I think Ben, I didn't record the vocals, but I think Ben from Screeching Weasel came to my studio and did vocals with Mike and stuff like that. So.
And you're still friends with Ben Weasel. I know Screeching Weasel had kind of abrupt ending.
It did. Yeah, and there was a couple of years where I didn't talk to him. I still remember when he came to that studio to get he had like a guitar amp there and a couple hard drives to collect them. But over the years I did slowly start working with him again on some mastering and remastering of stuff. You know, Mike's basically the mix engineer now for Screeching Weasel, Mike Kennerty. And but yeah, I went to Ben's house at some point this past summer for a cookout. I don't think it was 4th of July, but it was some kind of summer. It might have been, I don't even know what it was, Memorial Day, some summertime cookout type deal, because he lives in Madison as well. So, you know, we don't go and hang out. We don't go out for lunch or anything and hang out. I would, but, you know, we're both busy. He's got 2 kids now, maybe 3. Yeah, I think he has 3 kids now. And perhaps twins, one of them. So I could be all wrong. I don't know. I'm not good at thinking on the spot. But yeah, still keep in touch with Ben. He lives in Madison. And I think he wants to get back out playing shows again. But with COVID, it was just too risky to book. You know, he doesn't like to do touring either with traveling in a van. It was too risky to book fly-out shows for a long weekend and then have something get canceled, someone gets sick, or who knows what. But I think he's open to playing shows again once it's a little more stable. Well, it pretty much is now, but holidays are coming. But I bet you next year he'll be playing more shows again.
Will Yesterday's Kids ever play a show again?
I wouldn't rule out like a one, you know, maybe in 10 years, one show kind of thing maybe at the 10th frame. You never know.
Hey, you guys have I know the Obsoletes have done some one-offs.
Yeah, we've reunited a few times here and there. I wouldn't rule it out. It's just one of those things where it has to be the right occasion and everyone has to be available. You know, John lives in Nashville now, and I know he would come back up to play, I'm sure. But it just takes coordination and a good reason to do it at this point. You know, we're not going to be writing new songs or anything like that. So it's.
Are you ever cautious about getting pulled too far in?
Well, like I said, the thing with Tommy started the way it started was, aside from that record store thing I mentioned where he did the in-store, I think he hired the Obsoletes to back him up for a short tour on the East Coast. And then he kind of stopped playing with Tim and John so much for whatever reason, but he was doing a January Midwest run of shows. And my friend Ben, who was managing me at the time, said, will you do live sound for these run of shows? And I hate doing live sound. I'm not a live sound engineer, but I've done live sound just because I know how the song should sound. Like some people are great at doing sound, like they know the sound system, but they've never heard the band's songs. And sometimes they're putting all this effects on the vocals, and the keyboard is super loud when it should be not very loud at all. You know, they just don't know the material, and it's not their fault. It's just, that's why a lot of artists have their own sound person, because they know the backing vocals should be loud or not loud. You know, just all this stuff. So I was comfortable doing that role. Like, I'll let the live sound person get it up and running, and then I mix the show to sound like it should sound. And long story short, but I agreed to do live sound for this run of shows, and then the bass player, who is Kat Popper, who's a very well-known bass player. You know, she plays with Jack White and Nora Jones and Ryan. Very great bass player. She had some health thing going on or something and couldn't do the show, so then it turned into, can you play bass for this run of shows instead of doing live sound? So I did. I learned the songs and played bass, and then that kind of evolved into bash and pop. So I wasn't really trying to be in a band, like join a band or anything. I was like, helping a friend out with some live, a week of live shows, doing live sound. And then the next thing you know, I'm in a band, and it was manageable, and then it got to just be too much for my my bandwidth to keep up with. Because the other guys like Joe and Steve, they were in like the Hold Steady and Mighty Mighty Boss Tone, so they're built for they are touring. They live. I don't want to speak for them that they live to tour, but they're used to doing touring's normal for them, and for me, it just didn't fit into my lifestyle or interests at that point to be gone that long. But I wouldn't rule out at some point a show just for fun, just if anything to be like a reunion of sorts of not so much the band but just people and friends that would come out to something like that.
Do you ever get nostalgic for the early Yesterday Kids days?
No, because we did it so much. Like I feel like I got enough of that, but almost like a class reunion or something to have, to do something like that would be fun. It'd probably be, Time Bomb Tom is such a pivotal. He booked so many shows. It'd probably be based around something that he would want to set up, like, like a couple summers ago now, the Boris the Sprinkler 30th anniversary.
You did the Obsoletes. What was it called? The Obsoletes project with Norb, with the Bob Dylan. I think was it Bob Dylan covers?
Yeah. Well, that came about. I had recorded a solo record for Norb where he played everything, and I love Norb and his music, and he's funny and writes great songs, but it was a little bit painful to do that record because he wanted to play the drums. He wanted to play everything, but he couldn't do the bass drum and the rest of the drum set at the same time. So, and this is before I was good at like metronomes and click tracks and editing. I could do it now very easily, but so he did like the drums in 2 passes. He did like all the hand stuff, and then he did the bass drum pedal on a separate pass. And it just got extremely messy. Like it probably hurt my head to listen to that album right now, even though the songs are good, but it's just a total mess. And then he wanted to do an album of Bob Dylan covers, and I'm like, you should just hire a band to do the music and just do your singing over it and do your thing. And I didn't mean for him to hire the Obsoletes, but he's like, somehow it turned into the Obsoletes being his backing band. So we learned, like a dozen Bob Dylan songs, and I think we knocked out our part in a day, and then Norb spent a day doing the vocals, and he to play his guitar parts, he banged a tambourine on his guitar strings, and I think it was a 12-string Dan Electro, so it got messy pretty fast, but it fits into the noise somewhere. But somehow he worked out a deal, like Alternative Tentacles Records put that out, Jello Biafra. I don't know how or why. And, we didn't put a lot of effort into that, and not a lot. Some people, I know people don't really love that. It's a novelty. I mean, we didn't put a whole lot of effort into it, but it was his idea to do that, and there's some funny moments in there for sure. Like little inside jokes and things that he improvised on. So it was fun to do, but it was totally, we did a few shows to support the album, but no touring, or it was more of a novelty side project thing. And really just because I didn't want to like sit there and watch Norb overdub bass drum on top of the existing drum track and then try to do it. It would have taken forever and it would have been a mess to do. Again, because it was a little before I got good at Pro Tools editing. We didn't even have Pro Tools at the studio. We had like some other software at the time that would have been challenging to do that with.
I know the Obsoletes and Yesterday's Kids have re-released, or you like reworked some of the stuff, and it was released on vinyl. I think there was another project that's still in the works that I think I saw pre-order a few months ago. Is that accurate?
For which band? Yesterday's?
It was either Yesterday's Kids or the Obsoletes.
Yeah, we had Mike Kennerty remix the first Yesterday's Kids. It's kind of a long. It's an EP, but it's a long EP. It's hard. I don't know if people consider it an album or an EP, but it's 8 songs, and Mike Kennerty remixed that because we didn't have good versions of the stereo mixes to remaster, but we did have the ADAT tapes, so we had the ADAT tapes transferred, and Mike remixed it, so now I just have to remaster. I've just been a little too busy with projects, and redoing the floor in my studio ate up some time, but at some point, we're going to release that EP, and Tim's kind of in charge of he knows all the bonus track, like live stuff or like songs we didn't originally put on it that might be good for the vinyl will probably just have the main songs, but the digital version might have a bunch of bonus tracks. I don't really know yet. We gotta sort through all that yet, but there is plans for it. It's just going very slowly.
Do you have any, like, looking back on, I guess, your full music journey from playing in a band and now with your business, would you do anything differently if you could go back?
I don't think so. I think it all worked out. I mean, I didn't plan on this being a business or a career. So if anything, I wish I would have gotten a jump start on, like, not having a business plan, but thinking of it more as like a business. But I got lucky in that, like, I started it before social media existed. So, like, all my networking and growing of a client base happened organically at shows, which I don't know if it's so easy to do these days, especially when the pandemic hit, because there just weren't shows. And I feel like people lean on social media a lot. But I don't think you can really just say, hey, I'm a mix engineer now or mastering, and here's my social media page. You actually have to do work that people like and want to work with you. You can't just put up a social media page and say, this is what I do. You might get a little bit of work, but I don't think it's going to be a solid foundation. Whereas, like, I wasn't even trying, but playing all these shows and recording all these bands laid a huge foundation because, people, I just did something for Nate from, I don't know if you know the band The Shrubbers or Modern Machines or NATO Coles. This guy that I used to see at the Concert Cafe, I met him at the Concert Cafe in the 90s because he was videotaping with a VHS camera a Boris the Sprinkler set at the Concert Cafe. And I met him, and I'm still working with him on his new album. I don't know if it's out yet. I think it's done, but I think it's not quite released. But my point is, it's like it goes so far back and so deep that I didn't realize I was doing that at the time. So I don't think I would change anything. I just think if anything, I should have made it more of an official business sooner, but it all worked out. But I wouldn't really change anything other than that. But at the same time, I didn't have a whole lot of business to manage back then. I was just filling time in between shows. I don't think I would really change anything at all, to be honest.
Could you tell me a little bit about Wavlab?
Yeah, that's the mastering software I use, and as I transitioned into mastering, I realized, you can't really do this in Pro Tools, and I know I'm getting a little technical, but, there's software for recording and mixing, and you can do some mastering in it, but it's not really set up for it's like the wrong vehicle. It's like trying to use a screwdriver when you need a hammer kind of thing. You can do a certain amount of mastering in Pro Tools, but at a certain point, it lacks features that I need every day in mastering. And I was a Mac user, and I didn't want to, and all the mastering programs were Windows at the time for whatever reason, which is weird because most of the recording programs are Mac, but the mastering programs were all Windows. I didn't want to get a PC because I just got over my PC PTSD from Simple Studios. He had a PC and it was always crashing, and it was like this big ordeal. When I started working at studios that had Macs, I'm like, wow, the computer is like invisible. It just works, and you just don't have to think about it. So I wanted to stay Mac. Anyway, Wavlab had just come to Mac, and it was a total mess, but at least it was available on Mac, and because I was outgrowing my mastering software. And so I've been using it for over 10 years now, and I really helped. I was basically just annoying. I was just reporting bugs on their forum and say, hey, this is broken, and finally I turned into a beta tester for the software. So now I'm using a version that isn't even released yet, because I can help develop features, report bugs, get them fixed faster. But that all led to, it's a very confusing program because it's not like Pro Tools for a reason, or Logic or anything like that. That's why it exists, and it's made by a German company with a French developer, so things are just a little goofy and they're just a little weird sometimes. And so I help people use that software, honestly, selfishly, because I didn't want them to cancel it because of no one's using it. I'm like, I want this software to have a healthy user base because I like it. It's just a little weird. So I started helping people understand it. I don't teach people how to master. I teach people how to use that software to do mastering. And I keep it that way on purpose because I think any art, it's hard to teach arts. It's like you can't teach someone how to paint a picture. I mean, to some degree you can, but mostly it has to be within you to be good at it, I think, or want to be good at it. But I do teach people how to use the software, the tool, because, again, I just wanted them to have a growing user base so they kept developing instead of saying, because there was this argument of, CDs are dying, so why do we need mastering software because, no one, but CDs aren't dying. People are still making a lot of CDs, as you guys probably know, being, doing what you do. It's like bands are still pressing CDs because you can sell them at shows and they're relatively cheap to make and fast to get. But even without CDs, you still need like this mastering software to lay out the album songs in a certain order, track markers, metadata. You're still laying out an album, and you can kind of do it in Pro Tools, but it's not cut out for that kind of work. It's cut out more for recording songs and stuff like that. So it's basically just a mastering software that I really like, and sort of became. And then when COVID, I tried to make a tutorial series, but I don't have the video skills. And then when COVID started, I'm like, I'll just do a live stream. It's not gonna be pretty. It's gonna be unedited, kind of like this, just but I show people how to do stuff. It's like, okay, because I was getting so many emails and social media messages like, how do I do this in Wavlab? And it's hard to type it all out. So I'm like, I'm just gonna do a live stream and people can watch how it's done. And if it's 3 a.m. and someone has a question, they can Google it on YouTube and find the answer. So
do you have a set time that you stream?
I try to do it every month, but occasionally when I'm too busy, I'm skipping November. But it's usually 3 p.m. Central on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday towards the end of the month. It's not super specific, but it's basically once a month. I pick a topic. I'm honestly kind of trying to I'm kind of holding back on doing much because the new version is going to be out within the next few months. I can't say when. I don't think it's been decided, but I don't want to do too much in the current version because the new one's going to be even better. So I'm trying to just kind of in a holding pattern to go too crazy with live streams right now.
These are all on YouTube if people want to see the past episodes?
Yeah, I even have a website called wavlabhelp.com. And it links to all the videos. They're hosted on YouTube, but the website kind of collects them all. And I do it for, the company is called Steinberg. They make a program called Cubase and Nuendo, which are more popular. And then Wavlab is like their mastering one, which is, the problem is it's such a niche software that like not many people use it. So it doesn't get tested as much. And yeah, it's just a very niche software. But yeah, if you go to wavlabhelp.com, all the videos are there. You can even download some of my settings. And they're not mastering settings. It's not like going to make your song sound good. It's more like presets for like rendering and just getting stuff exported and just being able to work faster. And it's a very small, I don't monetize it. Although Steinberg, I do the live streams for Steinberg. So technically I work, they pay me a monthly fee to do these live streams and maintain the website, but it's not a job. It's more of a side thing that I do just to help keep the software user base, happy and healthy and make it a better product. Because the developer's very good, but sometimes, developers don't know what the users actually experience. It's like he's busy developing the software, but he's not a mastering engineer. So it helps to have feedback of people that use it daily. And everyone's, there's a handful of mastering engineers that also beta test it. And they say, I like to do it this way. Can you add this? And I like to do it that way. So we're all, but I just became the person that gets all the questions, I guess. And I got tired of answering emails. So I said, I'm going to just do live streams and cover all these topics. So they're out there in the world.
Am I imagining things, or did you teach a class at MATC for a while as well?
Yeah, I did. I started at MATC, which is Milwaukee Area Technical College. Just teaching introduction to audio software, not even mastering. Because a friend of mine, or this guy that I knew, started teaching there, and the audio program was very popular. So they needed more like part-time teachers and stuff. And I thought, be cool to try teaching for a little bit. And
Did you like it?
I liked elements of it. I didn't like all the meetings. I'm like, why? So many meetings about nothing. I'm like, I could spend this time making the class better, like writing a new part of the class. So but I like that. Yeah, the actual there's usually each class had like one or two students where you could tell they're going to do that. They could be good at this, and a lot of them, you could tell their heart wasn't in it. But I also tried to tell them, like, we're teaching them kind of traditional, boring stuff, and a lot of the younger kids, they want to learn how to make beats and stuff. So I don't know how to make beats and stuff, but you got to get someone in here that can teach them what they want to learn, because you're teaching them boring, like how to record voiceovers in Pro Tools, which is important. It's a fundamental skill to have, but I think they were losing some of the students based on not thinking about what younger kids really want to learn how to do. It's changed a lot since some of the people that wrote the curriculum were older and like just not thinking about what would interest a 19 to 22-year-old kid. But I did end up teaching the mastering class for a couple of years because the guy that was doing it retired somewhat unexpectedly. So I jumped into that role for a couple of years. But when COVID hit, I finished that semester online, and it went really well. I loved it. But then starting a new semester with COVID, everything was a mess, but they were supposed to you have to have a computer to take this class online, and they didn't really enforce any computer or software standards for the students to have. And I know not everyone can afford a computer or whatever, but it's an elective class. So, I can't teach a class if someone doesn't have A, a computer, or B, so it got to be too messy, so I stopped doing it.
COVID killed Professor Perkins.
A little bit, yeah. And I had moved to Madison. I don't know if I think my studio was still in Milwaukee, so I was still doing it from Milwaukee, but I just said, this is a total mess trying to do this online. I loved finishing the semester online because the students had established some stuff, but trying to start a semester online where people need specific software and a computer, it's just like to quote Bill Hicks, trying to show a dog a card trick or something. They're just like, what? There's just no. It was pointless. It was a waste of time. Unless the school can issue all the students a laptop with the software, then I just can't do this.
It's pretty.
And also, I had too much stuff going on in my life, and I had to cut out something, and that was easiest and best. And maybe I'll teach again someday at some point, but yeah.
I guess looking forward then with all that you've done, and who would have thought that you'd be teaching college classes?
Yeah.
Is there anything that, looking forward, that you sort of aspire to do yet with your career?
Well, interestingly enough, when I moved to Madison, a music or audio college in LA reached out to me, kind of in a panic, to see if I'd want to teach their mastering course for the upcoming semester. But it was starting in 2 weeks, and I was in the middle of moving our personal stuff. I'm like, I would be doing a disservice to accept this position, because I'd be totally, I wouldn't be giving it my all. I'd be, winging it way too much. So, but at some point when I can actually plan for that, I would consider everything's online now basically, so it's, it wouldn't be too weird to do that online, especially if you can establish, hey, you need to have this software to keep up with what I'm doing. Then, so yeah, teaching at some point, I could see. I don't want to do it, but I could also, work for a software company helping develop software. I don't know how to do the actual coding, but overseeing the mastering software and how it's the features that it has and stuff like that. But mostly, hopefully, I just keep knowing bands and artists that need mastering done, so I can stay busy doing that for as long as my hearing lasts. Which I do at the show. I do have nice earplugs, custom-made earplugs that still sound good, and you can't even really see them. But I got them when I was about 24 or 25, and I was worried that that was going to be too late in life. Because at the time, they seemed to spend, when you're in your early 20s, it seems crazy to spend that much on earplugs. But when you think about it, if you do this for a living, you just have to do it. And I got them in time to preserve my hearing. One of those pieces of software I use is spectral editing. It's called Isotope RX, and I listened to every song through it to clean up little clicks and pops, and I kind of treat that as like my hearing test because I can see these high frequency ticks and pops, but I'm also glad that I can still hear them. So it's like kind of like giving myself a hearing test every day because I'm listening to random audio with high frequency clicks and pops and weird things, and I'm like, if I ever start seeing the issues but not hearing them, then I'll know I have a problem. But I still hear them first and then look for them later. So
where can people go to find out about Mystery Room Mastering?
Well, www.mysteryroommastering.com is the best place. I know you might edit this later. I can give you the link tree that has all my links to like social media, but the studio website has links to all the social media, Instagram, Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I always will. All the places you can find me where I'm active. And then, like you said, the website has a calculator page to not only see what things cost, but submit the info to me right away. I get a lot of projects in without any prior communication. It's just like, boom, all the information's in my inbox, and I can get started on it. So that's how people can submit projects. But if you do have questions that the website doesn't answer, you can always email me and talk over email or set up a phone call. Or occasionally I've done some Zoom calls to discuss. But usually the website is so streamlined that doesn't have to happen much. And I kind of developed that, like, as bad as Amazon is for small businesses, that concept of you go on there and you know exactly what it's going to cost, and you can purchase it without having to talk to anybody. You just click a couple buttons and I wanted that same, because sometimes people, it's like the middle of the night and they finish their record and they want to know if and how they can get it mastered, and it's 2 a.m. and I'm not going to answer a phone call at 2 a.m. because my phone's always on silent, but they can go on the website and start looking around at, like, how much is this going to cost and what does he need to know to start, so people can submit stuff. Plus, I do a lot of stuff for people in Europe and stuff, so it's obviously like different time zones. So that's where you can go. That's the main thing, and that takes you everywhere else you need to go.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us for this. This was a lengthier than I thought, but I appreciate.
Sorry, it's getting late in the morning already. It's almost noon. It's almost time for kickoff.
I appreciate how generous you are with your time, and of course the stuff you've done for the Fox Cities in Wisconsin and beyond. Music scene in general is just amazing. So thank you for all of that, Justin.
No problem. I was just lucky to grow up here. I mean, there's so much music. I mean, I've never lived anywhere else or grew up anywhere else. I don't know, but I feel like there was just such an explosion of bands in the 90s and 2000s that I was lucky to be around for and be able to, not only work with, but hone my skills together with, it's a mutual thing, and I'm just glad that I can still keep doing it. So thanks for having me on, and thanks for doing what you guys do with getting this stuff out there in the new world of technology and streaming, internet radio. When I started out, internet radio wasn't really a thing, and you had to listen to FM radio or AM, and now it's like this can go all around the world. It's pretty crazy.